thank you for coming. My name's Anna. I'm a developer at a consultancy called Carbon5. A couple fun facts about me. I'm one of the co-founders of ElixirBridge. I'll tell you more about that in this talk. I almost went to medical school. Best decision I ever made was not going. No offense to anybody in the audience who might be in that field, but for me. And when I'm not working on ElixirBridge and I'm not working at Carbon5, I'm trying to get better at climbing rocks. That photo is from a trip I took to Bishop earlier this year in the Eastern Sierras. It was really fun. So what do I want to talk about today? We've heard a lot, even already at this conference, about community and talking about community. So I want to talk about why is it important, other than the fact that we're good humans and we want to be welcoming to other good humans. Why should we care? And then as we're creating that community, what should we think about? What are the things that we need to be in place to really get to that welcoming, inclusive community that we talk about? And we know that community work is hard, right? A lot of projects are run by one or two people, so how to really make that work sustainable? So why is community important? So I think we've all heard the phrase, at some point in our careers, right? We build better products with diverse teams. So I want to take a look at an example of what happens when maybe a team is not so diverse. Some of you may already be familiar with this, but a few years ago, Facebook launched or tried to launch a program in India called Free Basics. And the idea was to partner with telephone companies in India and give people who couldn't afford to buy data access to the internet. They would get access to Facebook and a handful of other websites. So population in India is about 1.3 billion people. And when Facebook was looking at its growth, it was then banned in China, and it was looking at where its next hundreds and millions of users were going to come from, or billion users. So it was looking at India. And this graph might actually be a little bit outdated because they didn't have the data for 2017. There are about 462 million people that have regular access to the internet, out of 1.3 billion. So there are many people in this country that don't actually have access. And a lot of those people live in rural areas. So Facebook thought that this would be a really good opportunity for them. They created this marketing campaign, a first step towards digital equality, support a connected India, and it sounds great. Free Basics was supposed to give internet access to people who couldn't afford it. The problem was, it seemed like a choice between no internet and free internet. But Facebook got to choose what sites people go to. And it was actually a really small handful of sites. This was ultimately struck down by the Indian court. Net neutrality activists got involved. And when that happened, one of Facebook's board members, who's actually a really prominent VC in Silicon Valley, said the following: India's rejection of Free Basics was as economically catastrophic to it as its independence from British colonization. Clearly, that's not true. And he later apologized. But the point here is that Free Basics was never a true philanthropic effort. Facebook did not understand the true needs of the population it was trying to reach. It was not clear that Facebook knew that actually India's most visited website, or one of its most visited sites, is its railway site, where 1.3 billion tickets are booked a day, right? Or that farmers in rural areas need weather forecasts, or that women in remote villages need access to feminine hygiene products. So why am I explaining all this? Promoting diversity means promoting understanding. And this ultimately leads us to build better products and solve problems for those who might otherwise have been sidelined, right? What if the Facebook team building the product had been more diverse? Or what if they had a better understanding of what the people in that country needed and built a platform so they could innovate and solve the problems for themselves? And so we know that this is true. We know this is important. And lots of companies have studied this. This typing might be small on this list, and I put it up there not so much so you could see the companies, but so you could see how many companies. A group of companies came together, and they created what's called the Task Force for Talent Innovation. And there are big names on here, right? There's AIG, Bank of America, who else is on here? I don't know, Times Warner, the New York Times, Goldman Sachs, et cetera. And they studied diversity in their companies, and they found the following. Companies that were diverse were 48% more likely to improve their market share, and 46% more likely to capture new market in a given year. McKinsey followed up with another study, right? Gender diverse companies were 15% more likely to outperform their competitors in a given quarter, and ethnically diverse companies were 35% more likely to outperform. And people might think, oh, causation, correlation, and the studies did mention that, But study after study, they saw the same results, that diverse companies actually did better. There was incentive in the financial bottom line. And the reasoning that we might all come to this conclusion is because diverse teams have a better understanding of their end user. They're able to innovate more efficiently, and they are ultimately able to deliver better product. So we know that diversity is important. But there's still a problem. Mitch Kapoor, who's a VC in Silicon Valley, and his wife Frida Kapoor created a center called the Level Playing Field Institute. And this past year, they partnered with the Harris Poll. They surveyed about 2,000 people who had left technology in the last 3 years. And they found that 30% of underrepresented folks were leaving because they felt unwelcome or mistreated. So we have brilliant people that are leaving the industry. And we've all seen the news, right? Google, Uber, the VC firms. We know that the tech industry is not always welcome. So what do? How do we help solve this problem? And taking it a step down, how do we ensure that the community that we create is welcoming and inclusive and invites those people in so they don't leave? So this brings us to ElixirBridge. Before I tell you about ElixirBridge, I want to tell you a little bit about an organization called RailsBridge, because that's what ElixirBridge is modeled after. Has anybody in this audience heard of RailsBridge? Oh my God, this is amazing. So I mean, I'm giving this talk, but you probably already know all the tenets I'm going to talk about. So RailsBridge was started by these two women, Sarah Allen and Sarah May, in 2009. They were the only two women in their tech meetup, and they decided to start RailsBridge because they wanted to change that. They're like, what if we get two women in a room and have a single workshop? They ended up getting 65 women, and then they did another workshop, and they did another workshop. And now RailsBridge has chapters all over the world. They've had hundreds of workshops. I myself have worked with RailsBridge for many years, and I think I've organized like 50 of their workshops at this point. And it's amazing because they're all volunteer run. But the most incredible thing is how fast this change was able to happen. They started in 2009, back when Rails was really hot, right? And they helped the Ruby community go from 2% women to 18% women in a single year. So to me, that's pretty amazing. So what is ElixirBridge? So the same thing, right? We hold free weekend-long workshops, day-and-a-half-long workshops, for underrepresented folks in tech to help them learn Elixir and Phoenix. And we started for a similar reason. The company that I work for, Carbon 5, had done some Elixir work. I was really excited about Elixir. I had gone to a couple meetups, but it didn't quite feel, they weren't bad, but it didn't quite feel as welcoming and inclusive as I would have liked them to be. And I was at a RailsBridge, and my friend Matt came up to me and said, we should really do this for Elixir. And so we started ElixirBridge. And so far, we've had a few workshops in San Francisco. We've had one in New York and one in Seattle. But what's exciting to me about the Elixir community is so many people have reached out, and they really do care about figuring out what we can do to make it a diverse and inclusive and welcoming community. To give you a little context, this is kind of what a workshop looks like. People come in the night before, we have dinner, they do InstallFest. And in the workshop, they come in the morning, the next day, ready to break into groups and build an application. We have an intro where we talk about our code of conduct. Then they self-select when they sign up for the workshop into like their skill level. So we break them up by skill level, and then there's a teacher and a TA in each classroom. They break up into separate classrooms. And the students and the teacher go through the curriculum together as a group. Everyone's working on their machine, but they're kind of moving along together. Then we have lunch, then we do another session, and then we have retrospective. And Jose talked a little bit about this in this keynote, right? How important it is to reflect. So we, after every workshop, break up the students and the teachers separately so people can speak candidly and tell us what went wrong, what was good, but what could be better, right? We want to make sure that we're really understanding the needs of the people we're trying to reach so that each workshop can be as productive and as effective as possible. And then we do happy hour at the end. And really, this is just a way for people to connect outside of that structured workshop setting, and just allows us another avenue for helping build community. So I want to talk a little bit about what has worked for us. This might not work for every organization, but with our larger goals of building a welcoming and inclusive environment, this term sounds a little bit vague. So what are the things that we thought or we think need to be in place in order to really reach that? And I'll go into each of these things in detail. But the things that we believe that you should have are a clear code of conduct. I know Bruce mentioned it at this conference, and that was awesome to hear. Your goals for the organization, rules for how your organization conducts itself, resources for the participants and the volunteers, and how do we keep it accessible. So we talk a lot about code of conduct, and it's really, really, really important. Again, I mentioned the news and the Google manifesto and Node forking its repository. Yet again, I'm sure we all have read and heard about that. So it's really important that the code of conduct exists, but also that it's clear. If anybody's interested in the one we use, our parent organization, Bridge Foundry, it's located at bridgefoundry.org/code of conduct. And our goal is really to create a community that's reflective of the diversity in the general population, right? And so in service of that goal, we try to be really explicit of how we expect people in our workshops to behave. We have a really clear anti-harassment policy. We're committed to an anti-harassment or harassment-free experience for everybody. And that policy is clearly outlined in our code of conduct, and we're really specific, right? We want to make it clear so that everybody's on the same page. What is unacceptable behavior? We believe that everybody that comes to the workshop has something to contribute, right? So everybody who is aligned and respectful and is abiding by the code of conduct has a right to take the workshop and access to the materials that we have. And anybody's allowed to hold a workshop. If they're reaching out to the populations that we are committed to reaching out to, and they're in line with our code of conduct, then the resources are free. Anybody can hold a workshop. And again, communication is nuanced, right? A lot of times there's a lot of gray area. So it's really important in your code of conduct to be, I said, as clear as possible, so we provide clear examples. And some of these seem a little bit ridiculous. Like you think this is common sense. Why do you need to state them? But if you state them and everybody can read them and everybody's on the same page, then there are no surprises. So something like using your words and respecting boundaries. So I was having a conversation with somebody at the conference, and they were really nice, and I don't think they were malintentioned. We were having a conversation, and they were talking about how they're really excited to be on this awesome Elixir team, and they have these people who are really good at systems level work, and they have these people that are really good at have done a lot of product work, and merging those together creates a really, really amazing team. And then the script kiddies from boot camp can work on the Rails app. So I did a boot camp several years ago, and I've had a lot of friends that did a boot camp, and we're all working in industry, we're all doing well. And I don't think that was the statement wasn't poorly intended, but it was a little off-putting, right? It created an environment where somebody's background and skill level is suddenly not as valuable as somebody else's. And my point here is that language really matters. So being careful about the language that we use when we're talking to people is really important. And similar to language, being respectful of people's space. Again, everybody has different backgrounds and different boundaries on what feels comfortable to them. An example that we give all of our teachers and our TAs is you're working with somebody and you're going to help them answer a question, and it's really easy to be like, oh, let me type this on your computer and reach over and take over their machine. We really encourage people and ask people to ask that person before they do that. It seems like a small gesture, but it actually does make a big difference. And again, we try to remind all of our participants that all of our materials are accessible and free for them so they can continue learning. And this last point we put on there, and again, it seems obvious, this is a thing that you should not do. But we have to put it on there so that people read it and it's clear, right? This is an environment for learning, and it's definitely not an environment to ask somebody out on a date. But there's still gray area, right? Sometimes things aren't clear, and good conduct requires good judgment. And there is a gray area between what's warm and acceptable and unacceptable. So we try to outline that as well. Again, in our code of conduct, we say gray area to try to be as specific as possible. We're not going to catch everything, but really we try and make sure everyone's on the same page. So again, something that we say, which you think we shouldn't have to say, but if you're not sure your behavior is appropriate, it probably isn't, right? If you're going to do this thing and you're like, this is a bad idea, probably don't do that thing that you think is a bad idea. And because everybody's coming from a different background, each person you interact with has their own normal, and they get to define what that is. So what is appropriate for you might not be appropriate for somebody else. And again, a lot of this sounds basic, but an example we give is if you met somebody at a workshop and they're awesome and you want to connect with them, and maybe you want to parent a project later or commit to open source or something, think about offering your contact information to them instead of asking them for theirs. Again, it seems small, but then you're not putting them in a position of having to say no or being uncomfortable, right? And that really changes the tone of the interaction and the tone of the environment as a whole. But things inevitably go wrong, right? We can be as specific and explicit as possible, but things happen. So it's really important not to just have a code of conduct, but to provide the people that are participating in your organization a source of action or steps to take when something goes wrong. So when students come into our workshop, during the intro presentation, we tell them about the code of conduct, but we also point out who all the organizers are and who to talk to if somebody is in violation of that code of conduct. And then in our actual code of conduct, we specify what they need to do to report that complaint, how to write it down, how to document it so that we can respond effectively. And then on the other side, we spell out specifically for organizers and volunteers, how can they take action? What do they need to do to ensure that participant who has had something happen feels safe, right? Is it providing them another safe space? Is it calling for someone to come to the workshop so that they feel safer? And then on the flip side, how to deal with the person against whom that complaint is being launched. Is it simply having a conversation? Is it removing them from the workshop? But being specific about these steps gives the people that are running the workshop and the participants the agency to take action if something does happen. And that is really, really important. Because how people act in a workshop reflects the tone of the organization, right? So if people come to the workshop and they have a horrible experience, that becomes reflective on the organization's values. And it's really important to make sure you maintain that inclusive and that welcoming space. I feel like it might sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm only saying it because it's really, really important. So this kind of filters into our values, one of our values as an organization. We believe that everybody has limited knowledge, but infinite potential. So when somebody comes into the workshop, they might not know something now, but it doesn't mean they're not going to know it later. And this is key to lowering this intimidation factor. Because when people come in and they don't have to worry about the fact that, oh my God, I'm in this room and everybody else knows more than me and I can't ask these questions, they can really focus on learning. And that definitely changes the tone of the environment. Another one of our values, we teach people to code because we believe that the people making the technology should accurately reflect the diversity of the people using it. We saw that this was crucial to companies. There's actually financial gain, but it's also beneficial to our community. If we create an environment where people are coming in with diverse backgrounds that think about things in a different way, that might use this language we're all really excited about to solve different problems, right? Or to think about solving problems in a different way, this ultimately creates more opportunity for the community as a whole, and we all benefit. So to do this, right, Jose talked in the keynote a little bit about goals for his language, but similarly goals for our community. Right? What do we need to have in place? What do we need to think about to get to this inclusive, welcoming, diverse environment that we talk about? So what is our mission? And I just mentioned that, right? We want to have free workshops for underrepresented folks in tech to help them learn Elixir and Phoenix to create this community that is going to be reflective and as diverse as the general population. So we know who our audience is. But how do we get there? How do we break these macro goals into micro ones? So some of our goals are we want to have one workshop a month in San Francisco. We want to create advanced curriculum, so folks that are interested in Elixir and have done some have something to get excited about. We want to create an infrastructure so that anybody anywhere in the world can take our resources and have a workshop. But to do that, we have to break it down into smaller pieces. And this is what a lot of us do for work every day, right? It's agile, it's iterative, taking the big idea and breaking it down. And when you do that, you can create specific pieces of work. And that makes it easier for somebody who's coming into your community to help. I was having coffee with a friend of mine a couple weeks ago. He's been working on an Elixir app for a long time, couple years. He does it professionally in production. He's like, I have a couple of weeks. I want to help with ElixirBridge. I was like, great. You know, we just upgraded to the latest version of Phoenix. It broke our install fest. Can you please go through it, make sure everything's working on your machine, make the changes that you can to our documentation? That would be awesome. So breaking down those goals into specific pieces not only lets us see where we need to go, but it makes it really easy when other people want to get involved to give them specific things that they're able to do. So rules, right? In order to reach these goals, we believe that you kind of need to have rules that help your organization function, right? So somebody violates the code of conduct, something happens, or if a student isn't violating the code of conduct, but they're just being disruptive, or an organizer's being disruptive, how do we deal with that? Or if somebody wants to take the resources from the organization and do another project that's completely out of line with your goals, like how do you respond? So Sarah May, who was one of the founders of RailsBridge, tweeted a lot about this a couple weeks ago, and there was a point that I wanted to make. And the point that she made that I think is really important, that if your goals are not serving, or if your rules are not serving your goals, change them, right? Don't get caught in the rigidity of the rules, which is kind of one of the problems it seems like the Node.js people were having, right? Change those so that you are always in service of your goals. Another thing that we found is incredibly important is for the people that take part in our organization to be really well resourced. We know that software engineers and software developers aren't not necessarily or inherently good teachers. Some of them might be, but some of them might not have done a lot of teaching. So we've developed teacher training that we do with all the people that want to participate as teachers in our workshop, so that they can gain some of the skills that they need in order to make sure they have effective experiences in the classroom. And we ask everybody who wants to teach to first be a TA, so they get an idea of how we run these workshops and the environment that they're creating. And in addition, because of our overarching goals, we're partnering with Bridge Foundry, which is our kind of parent organization, to create a conflict resolution training for our teachers. So the teachers have the skills that they need to resolve any kind of difficult situation that might come up in a workshop, so that everybody that's in their workshop can still feel safe and welcome. So accessibility is something we talk about a lot, right? When I gave a talk at Erlang Factory earlier this year, and the talk was about how Elixir allows us to be better developers. And it was looking at the language and the constructs of the language and the things that it allows us to do. At the end of the talk, somebody asked me a question, and I think I said something along the lines of, it's more accessible than Erlang. And Joe Armstrong was in the room, and Dave Thomas was in the room. And Joe Armstrong said, well, it doesn't matter if it's hard, as long as the end result is beautiful. And Joe Armstrong's a lovely person. This is not to be negative about Joe Armstrong. It was just an interesting thing to hear him say. And then Dave Thomas responded and said, no, accessibility is actually really important. It does matter. And we also think, as an organization, that it does matter. So what do we think about when we think about accessibility? So we make sure that our workshops are free. We don't want cost to be a prohibiting factor in somebody being able to attend. Another thing we think about is food. We have dinner, we have breakfast and lunch at our workshops. And one of the reasons is it helps people connect. When they're sitting and having lunch, they can actually share stories and share information with one another. But also, we don't want it to be a cost factor. We want it to be one less thing that people have to think about when they're coming to our workshops. Again, we're trying to lower the barrier to entry as much as possible. Another thing we think about is childcare. Somebody should not be prohibited from coming to one of our workshops because they either can't afford a sitter or can't find one. So we find a sitter and we have them on site so their parents can come and bring their kids, and the sitter will take care of their kids while the parents are able to attend the workshop. Next thing I want to talk about is Install Fest. I mentioned that we have people come the day before the workshop and install everything they need to make sure their environment is running. And we've all done this, right? If we can remember, some of you can remember way back, or you're setting up a new dev environment, or even now when you're setting up one for work, it can be frustrating, something's not working. It can be incredibly hard to get that finished. And so we don't want that to be a deterrent. So we provide time for people to come in before the workshop. We have volunteers available so that everybody can get what they need for the next day and have that be as smooth a process as possible. So the next day, instead of being frustrated about something that didn't work, they can be excited about learning. And this last point I'm going to talk about is introductions. So we all have name tags. I'm not wearing mine right now, but we all got name tags for the conference, right? That's a nice way of us being able to connect, and you can see somebody's name and say hi to them. So when people come into our workshop, we give them name tags, but we also ask them to write their preferred pronouns on their name tags. And the reason that we do this is because the pronouns that someone might identify with are not the ones that you might attribute to them based on their physical attributes. And we want to be as respectful as possible of each individual that comes into the workshop. And this makes it clear and makes it easy for us to be able to refer to that person in the most respectful way possible. The second point about introductions is we encourage all of our teachers in their workshops to go around the room and do introductions with all of the students before they start class. And what does this do? So not only does this give the teachers a frame of reference for the students in the class, they learn about how they might structure the class, or might give them context on what direction they need to go in so that the material is more digestible. But for each of the students in the room, it gives them a little bit more relatability to each other. They don't feel like they're the only one in the room who's like, oh my God, I have no experience, I can't ask questions, everyone here knows more than I do. So they're able to get a sense of other people in the room, and again, it lowers this intimidation factor. Everybody starts to feel a little bit more comfortable, and then they can ask questions, and they can really get the information they need. So what happens when you have these volunteers that are incredibly well-resourced, and you have these students that feel welcome and safe and excited to be there? This is a term that I think was coined by Sarah Allen, the other founder of RailsBridge, but really I think it's an old Gilder's term called a community of practice. It's not just the teachers teaching the students, right? The students and teachers are sharing information and they're learning from one another. And we know that creating good software is all about having a collaborative environment, right? It's taking a group of people that have an in-depth understanding of a problem, who can communicate and then collaborate effectively to bring something to life. And that's exactly what we're modeling in these workshops. Students and teachers are working together and collaborating and communicating to bring something to life. And not only do the students learn, but the teachers learn. Students ask questions. I've had so many volunteers come up to me and be like, I think I got just as much out of this workshop as the students, because the students will ask questions. And this will not only maybe reinforce the teacher's foundations of topics that they're explaining, but maybe they'll force them to think about it in a different way. And I've also had volunteers come up to me and say they've taken these collaborative, communicative processes back into their workplace, because not all of them work in an environment that's super welcoming and super communicative. And so not only is this good for our community, and it's baby steps, but baby steps by baby steps, we are helping transform the tech industry as a whole. So what else does this culture of collaboration and communication allow for, right? We remind people to ask questions, right? This culture of working together allows people to feel like it's okay to not know. And when people feel like it's okay to not know, they can ask the questions they need to ask, and they can really get the information that they need. Because if they're not doing that, then they're not learning, then we're not reaching our goals and we're not doing our job. And it also reminds volunteers that it's okay not to know. But all of this is a lot, right? A lot of work. Who here has managed or contributed or collaborated and put a lot of effort into an open source project or done workshops, right? So you all know I have a lot of respect for everybody who put on a workshop at this event. Having written curriculum myself, it's a lot of work and it can be exhausting. So how do we keep it sustainable, right? What are the things that we can put in place to make sure that people don't burn out so that the community can keep growing? Again, this is specific to us, but hopefully some of these things might be relevant for people who are thinking about getting involved. So again, being specific about the goals and tasks, breaking those things down into digestible pieces of work so that people can come in and help. And then inviting people in. Sometimes you're at a workshop and things are running smooth and they're awesome. And so somebody might want to help, but they don't know where to start. They don't know who to talk to, but also it seems like everything's already being done, when in fact it's just like two people that are trying to keep this thing going. So inviting people in if they seem interested is really important. And then when they do invite them in, you have those little pieces of work. People, from my experience, seem to respond better to specific pieces of work that they can grasp onto. Because if you invite somebody in and they don't have something to do, often that motivation to help kind of wanes. And then keeping things as low commitment as possible for both students and volunteers. So a volunteer can come to a single workshop, a student can come to a single workshop, or they can come to many workshops, or somebody can contribute to the docs, or somebody can help with InstallFest, right? But help can come on many, many levels. It's really important to remember. The thing that's most exciting for me is the Elixir community is young, and it seems to be really excited about diversity. So I really think we can make this happen. And I want to leave you all with two thoughts. One is that there are really amazing people doing this work. If you are interested in this work, there's a conference in November called Elixir with Love, and those folks are doing something really cool. They're combining Elixir talks and talks about Elixir, but really talks about diversity and inclusion. They really care, so I urge you to check them out. And the other thing that I want to leave you with is kind of a call to action. We're all here because we're really excited about Elixir. So I want all of you to think about who are the next 10 people that you would think about sharing your excitement about this language with. And what do those 10 people look like? Are they reflective of this welcoming, diverse community we need to create? And if they're not, who are the 10 people that you need to reach out to? And then I encourage you to reach out to them. It seems like a small step, but even just reaching out and sharing that excitement, that small step, is really crucial in helping us build this welcoming, diverse community that we are all so excited about. So thank you so much for listening. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm thinking about the issues like introversion versus extroversion.
Mm-hmm.
And that somehow when people are participating and if they're a little, I mean, there's always been sort of a premium placed on extroversion. I mean, we they may have a hard time actually asking a good question. But if you have somebody who's 30 or 40, has more life experience, they've often built the ability to, you know, articulate better the questions that they want to ask, and so they can get maybe better answers. So how do you even begin to educate the people who may be a little introverted, maybe also a little bit, you know, beginners at asking good questions, to improve that ability? Because in fact, if you can learn to ask better questions, then you can probably provide better answers as a teacher. Otherwise, you're having to anticipate what you think I'm saying, and that's what I've noticed as a teacher. These are difficult things to sort of say, okay, I think you're saying this. Is that what you're saying? And then you're, again, sort of saying, am I taking the role of you? And am I really, is this what you're really thinking? Or you're feeling intimidated by me telling you this is what I hear?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think you're right. It's actually a really hard thing to do. The way we've tried to address that is one of the reasons we have TAs in the room. So there's a teacher teaching, but there's 2 TAs. And what that allows for is for students can just call over a TA and ask that question directly to that person. They don't have to ask it in front of the whole group. And then if we see that there's somebody, like the TAs are they're not hovering, but they're in the room and paying attention. And so if they see that there's somebody that might be not moving at the same pace as the rest of the group, they might sit next to that person and kind of work with them to help them figure it out, or take them, or suggest that they either join another class or they work with them separately. So it's kind of how we've mitigated that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Do you ever do more like anonymous? Like I might text something, I might text something to you, or people might text something to you, and it shows up more anonymously?
I have done that in a couple workshops, not with ElixirBridge yet, but we've done that with a couple of RailsBridge workshops where we'll have people can send, we've put up like a little server and people can text anonymously to it if they have questions.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just curious, thinking of sustainability, how do you find funding for all of these workshops?
So I've been really fortunate. The company that I work for has funded a lot of the ElixirBridge workshops. RailsBridge gets funding from a lot of companies. It's being based in San Francisco. But I have found that it's a little bit harder if you don't have tech companies in your area. If you do have tech companies in your area, I found that they're generally really happy and supportive and willing to give money to people doing this work. If you don't have funding, but let's say you want to do an ElixirBridge workshop, we will help you find the funding. So if somebody's in this room is like, I live somewhere and I don't think I can find funding to put this workshop on, I don't think I have a venue, we will do the fundraising for you. But yeah, that is a challenge, getting people to give you the money and the space. Usually we get the space donated, and either the company that's donating the space will pay for the food, or one company will donate the space and one company will pay for the food for the workshop.
Hi, I've TA'd a couple RailsBridge workshops, and it's really inspiring seeing people whose computer experience is like a little bit of Microsoft Word, build these web applications, and part of that it feels like is 2 things: the accessibility of both the Ruby language, there's not a lot of syntax to get caught up in, and then how much Rails kind of abstracts away for you. Conversely, Phoenix seems a lot more explicit, and there are a lot of language constructs in Elixir, like pattern matching or something that are not going to be as immediately obvious because they may not read like English. I'm curious if you can share some stories about seeing people with relatively little tech experience. Does this feel as accessible to you as RailsBridge, or yeah, can you share some success stories, and also maybe issues where accessibility in terms of the language constructs has been harder?
Yeah, so actually we're not as accessible as we want to be yet. So for the workshops that we've had so far, the curriculum that we've written, we ask people to have a little bit of programming experience, meaning they understand what data types are, or variables, data structures. They maybe have played around in the terminal. I don't think we've had anybody yet who is brand new, but that is one of our goals. We need to backfill our curriculum to kind of do what RailsBridge did with the language, so people can do that first and grasp some of those concepts. So yeah, we're not there yet, but it's on our radar. Any other questions? Nope. Cool. Thank you so much for coming.